What's up, guys, and welcome back to our mini series. Today, we are talking about the Atlanta Falcons and their fantasy relevancy. I am most excited to hear how many times Jordan says that this defense stinks because he said it a lot when referring to the Atlanta Falcons. So that's what I'm looking forward to today. Um, Starting off with their quarterbacks, Matt Ryan obviously is their number one there. That's not going away unless he gets hurt. I have him projected out. I just lost my screen here. I have him projected out at about 4,700 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, another 140 on the ground with 2 touchdowns, putting him at about 363 fantasy points on the season, which is one of my towards the top half. I mean, Matt Ryan, as long as he's on the field, he's always a threat to be a quarterback one any given week and to finish the season as a top 12 quarterback. And I don't see that going away, especially with the weapons that he has behind him. He's not really a threat for his job, but if Matt Ryan goes down, Matt Schaub could come in and he could kind of keep the offense afloat. He's not going to put up Ryan numbers, but he is gonna. He started in this league before, started for the Texans before. He could definitely get the ball to Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and hopefully keep the offense afloat again. According to Jordan, this defense absolutely stinks, so maybe they're not going to win many games with Matt Schaub, but that remains to be seen. Matt Ryan is the guy here. What's your thoughts on Matt Ryan in the quarterback room?
I mean, I think this defense stinks, so just for the record. But no, I mean, I think you're very much undervaluing Matt Schaub. He had a game with 460 yards last season,
Oh,
and I started him as my QB too, and that was fantastic.
Sign him
I
to a
don't know.
long-term contract. Give him
I
the
don't
Matt
know
Flynn
what kind of.
treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a desperate situation to be starting Matt Schaub, but besides the point. That was just lucky more than anything else. But yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned it. I think Matt Ryan's a candidate to throw for 5,000 yards, honestly, and it's kind of crazy to throw that out there. But yeah, I mean, they're going to be down in a lot of games. They were
Why?
number one because their defense stinks. Okay, that's in my notes. It says defense stinks. That's my only notes on the entire Falcons team is that their defense stinks. I think it's the worst defense in the league. But I mean, they led the league in pass attempts last year. I'm pretty confident they'll do it once again. He has great weapons this year. Lost Austin Hooper, but they replaced him. Lost Devontae Freeman, but replaced him with a even more injury-prone running back. So right now, Matt Ryan's going as QB8. I think that's reasonable for him. I think he'll beat that ADP, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was a top 5 guy this year.
All right. Going on to the running backs, as you mentioned, they replaced their running back with a more injury-prone running back. They got Todd Gurley. He was a league winner just 2 years ago, but now he's just trying to stay afloat. They gave him, I don't even remember what the contract that they gave him, 1 year deal, but they're gonna run him into the ground. There's really no threat behind him either. I mean, obviously, if Gurley gets hurt or if he needs a breather, one of these other guys between Brian Hill, Quadri Olison, or Edo Smith is going to come in. I'd probably give the edge to Edo Smith. I guess the biggest thing here is where would you take Todd Gurley in a draft, and then who are you handcuffing him with? Because it's three names here, but none of them are really sexy. Who are you handcuffing Todd Gurley with?
I'm not handcuffing Todd Gurley with anybody, honestly, because I think it'd be a waste of a draft pick. I mean, I'd rather take a guy that could possibly be involved in I never take handcuffs, just for the record. I only take players that I think could be involved in that offense because I don't want to rely on somebody getting injured for them to have fantasy relevance. I can pick up those guys off the waiver wire. I'll pick up Reggie Bonifin if Christian McCaffrey gets hurt. I mean, so I just don't like wasting a pick. I mean, I do think that probably the primary back will be Brian Hill because I think he's more of a goal line, bigger back that could replace what Todd Gurley does. But realistically, if Todd Gurley goes down, this is going to be a committee. You'll have Brian Hill working the short down role, and then Edo Smith would probably be their third down back. So I don't think they'd have a bell cow, and that even further exemplifies why I wouldn't draft any of these handcuffs. I mean, it'd be a committee realistically. It might be a three-headed committee with Quadri Olison thrown into there, so I wouldn't trust any of them. If I'm drafting Todd Gurley, and I feel like I've talked about him a million times, and I kind of have, and even though his jersey's behind me and he's probably listening, I mean, I don't have much faith in him. I'll take him as my flex. I'll say that. if you're a team that's relying on him to be your first or second running back because you took wide receivers earlier, I don't trust that. But Todd Gurley's going to have the volume because we brought up those backup names. I mean, those guys aren't taking touches from Todd Gurley. He's going to be the bell cow. It's a 1 year, $6 million deal. He'll get most of the touches, all of the goal line touches. So he'll definitely be a volume play, but I just don't think he has a ton of upside. I think I had him in my rankings as like RB 19 or 20, right around that range. And I think that's where he is. He's kind of like a middling RB2 that's more touchdown dependent at this point in his career. He's not a guy that I'm confident that's going to get over 100 scrimmage yards, but if you're looking for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns, I think that's probably his upside at this point. So I've already mentioned before, but all of his metrics are kind of in the toilet now. He's not the same elusive running back that he's been in the past. So he's going as the 15th back off the board right now, and I think a lot of that's just because people are hoping for the same Todd Gurley, and that will not happen.
Nope, not at all. All right, moving into their offensive line. This is really interesting. They have all 5 of their starters are former first-round picks. 2 of them just last year. They got Chris Lidstrom and Caleb McGarry on the right side of the line. But I mean, they got a lot of talent on that offensive line, and that could only help out Todd Gurley and Matt Ryan as long as they could open up holes and protect the quarterback. But where do they rank?
Pro Football Focus has them as the 24th best offensive line.
Oh, perfect.
And when you look at so towards the bottom half, when you look at their rankings, actually in terms of pass blocking and run blocking, the note that they have is it's the worst offensive line that Matt Ryan's had in his entire career.
So their offensive line stinks.
Yep, a lot of young guys, terrible defense, terrible off. I mean, they're young though, so that's when you look at metrics like these, you have to take them with a grain of salt because these guys do improve, And you mentioned they were first-round picks for a reason. They invested a lot of draft capital, and it maybe not wisely, but they've invested the capital. So I wouldn't be surprised if they beat that. But there's no way that they're more than a middle of the pack offensive line at best.
All right. Before we move on to the wide receivers, I can't go without saying this name. I really hope Justin Gooseberry makes the team.
What position does he play?
He's a guard.
I'm gonna buy you a jersey for your birthday.
He doesn't have a number yet. All right.
Gooseberry, I like that.
Yeah. All right. So their offensive or their wide receivers. Now you got me all flustered. Their wide receivers. They have probably one of the top pairing in the entire league, but then after them, it's just a bunch of guys. They did bring in Laquan Treadwell he was formerly with Minnesota, so he could see some time just because they don't really have any other weapons outside of Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. But let's talk a little bit about those two because those are going to be the guys getting all the work. Julio Jones, he's fallen in drafts. I mean, I don't know if it's because of just like people are just drafting age or what, but he should be a first round pick in all formats, unless it's a super flex and quarterbacks are going, but he should be a first round pick, even if it's number 11, number 12, he should be a first round pick. I've actually seen him go at 4-1 at one time. I've seen him go at the end of the second and early third. I don't know why. I mean, Julio Jones, he's been one of the best wide receivers since he came into the league. He is, whenever you're comparing wide receivers, whenever you have, all right, who's better, player X or Julio Jones? It's always Julio Jones on the other side. So it's like, I mean, you're always comparing Julio Jones, but you can't put him, he's not one of your top fantasy wide receivers. That's just crazy to me. And then Calvin Ridley, he's a benefit of Julio Jones because Julio Jones does take away a lot of coverage, so Calvin is able to get open. But Calvin was a first round pick too, so it's not like he's just benefiting because of Julio. He has all the talent in the world too. This pairing is great. I can't even say it's the best pairing in the division because they still have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in that division, but they are one of the top pairings in the league.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would agree with that. And I agree with Julio being undervalued. I mean, I personally don't really understand it, especially in PPR leagues. I mean, if you're looking at I always see Devonte Adams and Tyreek Hill go higher. I mean, I'd rather have Julio, honestly, especially over Tyreek Hill in a PPR league. Julio is a PPR monster, so I don't really get it. I understand he's been a little underwhelming in terms of touchdown production. When you look at a guy with his size and speed, you would expect him to put up huge touchdown numbers, and he's just never really been a big threat, and that's kind of Calvin Ridley's area now. Ironically enough, he's a smaller receiver, but they're red zone threat, so that's beyond me. I guess that's why I'm not an offensive coordinator. But I mean, when you look at Julio's finishes throughout his entire career, and he's really only missed one season because of injuries. Even going back, his rookie season, he was a 17th wide receiver overall in terms of fantasy production.
They had
I mean,
Roddy White at that time too.
yeah, I mean, I loved Roddy White. You rarely see a rookie finish 17th, and then you move beyond that. All his other finishes: 11th, 6th, 2nd, 6th, 7th, 4th, 3rd. So he's always been a wide receiver one. I mean, if you want a guy that's guaranteed to give you the I mean, you're paying pretty high capital for him when you take him. If you want to guarantee that he's going to return what you paid for him, I mean, it's Julio. So I don't really understand the hate as well. We talked about this in a different pod. He has this injury stigma, and I really don't understand that. I mean, he's one of those guys that's annoyingly questionable every week, but he always plays, so who cares? I mean, to me, I see Julio's questionable, and I just kind of laugh it off like, yeah, that means nothing. He's playing. He's fine. And, I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, you look at it, he plays 16 games pretty consistently, so I don't understand it, and I agree. I think he's great value right now. Calvin Ridley, so I'm going to have a very kind of differing opinion on him than a lot of people. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's very talented. When you look at all his metrics, he very rarely drops the ball, and we saw that when he was at Alabama. He has great hands. He has great touchdown production, but I guess my biggest thing with him is the way he's rising up draft boards. I mean, is he rising too fast at this point? Because I really think that he is. I mean, when you look at last season, he was 18th in points per game, so very reasonable, a solid wide receiver too. But he's going as the 14th wide receiver off the board right now, and I don't know. I have a problem with that. Could he beat that? Yeah, maybe, but he's not even the best wide receiver on his team. So I mean, I have a problem, especially in PPR leagues. He's not a guy that's going to have 90 to 100 receptions like Julio. He's more of the red zone touchdown threat. So I really think Ridley, I liked him if he was going in like that 20th range as more of a back end wide receiver too with some upside, but I really think you're paying for him at his peak as the 14th wide receiver off the board. And I know everybody loves him as, they keep saying they're sleeper. I mean, you can't call the guy a sleeper if he's going as the 14th wide receiver off the board. So that's kind of where I stand on Calvin Ridley. And don't get me wrong, I think that he could finish as easily as a top end wide receiver too, but I mean, that's what you're drafting him at. So are you really getting much value out of it? I wouldn't say so, but I also a name you didn't bring up is Russell Gage, and I know that's probably not a sexy name to people, but in PPR leagues, I mean, he did have 13 targets the last game of the season last year, had a few other games with 9 and 10 targets, and the reality is this is going to be a high volume passing offense. And he's going to be the slot receiver. Julio and Calvin Ridley really never run routes out of the slot. So Russell Gage is their primary slot receiver. I wouldn't be surprised if he had 72 targets last season. I wouldn't be surprised if he had 80 to 90 in his second season with the team. So I think he's a good late round PPR stash. He's really not being drafted. So I kind of like him as a sleeper too.
Perfect. And then speaking of sleepers going into the tight ends, I think Hayden Hurst is going to be a excellent tight end for this team. He's taken over a role that Austin Hooper had, and Austin Hooper was used a lot in this offense, and that's probably where the third guy comes in after Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. I think it's going to be Hayden Hurst. Is he going to have the same production as Austin Hooper did? We can't even say no. I mean, it's definitely possible. All the targets are there. They actually have some more targets left over because of beginning of the season last year they had Mohamed Sanu, which they traded away to the Patriots. So you got every opportunity for Hayden Hurst to make some noise. They really don't have a legit second tight end on this team, so you're probably looking at Hayden Hurst being on the field a bunch of the time. I mean, you're probably looking at about 95% of the time that he's going to be on the field. Kahari Lee is the other tight end that they got, who
There we
came
go.
over from, yeah, from the XFL. I forgot who he played for. It was Houston, the Houston Roughnecks.
Yeah, yeah, he was with PJ Walker. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he was decent in the XFL too. I mean, he caught a lot of balls there, but the XFL is a different animal than the NFL. So we'll see how he's been in the league before. I think he's been with about three or four other teams, but it's Hayden Hurst's. It's his position. It's his time. He came over from Baltimore, who had Mark Andrews break out last year, and so he was expendable over there. And I think that he landed with the best team that could use a tight end that is going to utilize him.
Yeah, and Kahari Lee's going from the number one passing offense in the XFL to the number one passing offense in the NFL. So there's something to be said for that. But yeah, I mean, we said this when Austin Hooper was a free agent, where if he left, whatever tight end goes there is going to be fantasy relevant. Hayden Hurst, I think, was a surprise to a lot of people. I don't know if a lot of people really thought about him as a trade candidate, but I mean, he was a fairly high pick in the draft, so he's a guy with a lot of upside, a lot of talent. Austin Hooper averaged 7.5 targets a game, which is quite significant. Even if Hayden Hurst took 5 or 6 of those targets a game, that's pretty significant. I was a little surprised to see where Hayden Hurst is going on draft boards right now. Fantasy Pros had him as tight end number 16 overall. And I like the way that they do it because they take into consideration his ADP on Yahoo, ESPN, and all the different platforms. So on average, he's going as the 16th tight end off the board, which if you get him as the 16th tight end off the board, I mean, you're going to jail because that's robbery, because that's a ridiculous ADP. To me, he's easily a top 10 guy. And yeah, I mean, even if he takes 6 targets a game, that's 96 targets on the season. So he's going to be extremely fantasy relevant. And I'm pretty confident saying I think he can be a top 10 guy this year.
All right, going on to their special teams. Their kicker is Young Ho Koo. Excellent name to say. It's a nice name to name your team after too. If you're into funny names for your team, they obviously Atlanta plays in a dome. They play one game in Tampa, which is nice warm weather unless it's raining. They got one game in New Orleans, which is in a dome, and another game in Carolina, also great weather. So he. I think you had Matt Gay as your number one kicker. Koo definitely has an opportunity to be the number one kicker as well, just being in the environment that he's in and in the offense that he's in. He's definitely up there. I think I had him. I don't remember when we did our kicker rankings, but I had him in my top 5 at least. I forgot where I put him, but he's definitely up there, and he's got every opportunity to be kicking field goals down in the now the Mercedes-Benz Dome. It used to be. I'm so used to saying the Georgia Dome, which it even isn't. It's not even the same building, but I'm so used to saying the Georgia Dome down there.
It's close enough. But yeah, I mean, call me crazy, but I had Young Ho as my second kicker off the board. So he, interestingly enough, he only started 8 games last season, and he was the number one kicker during those games. So he already mentioned the weather conditions, very high octane offense. He definitely is a contender to be the number one kicker this year.
And then we usually like to throw in there kick and punt returners. It's not really, as it stands right now as we're doing this episode, it's not really solidified that we don't know. I mean, Brian Hill is listed in there as the kick returner. So obviously, if you're a Ty Gurley owner and you are somebody that does take handcuffs and Brian Hill is your guy, he could offer you some opportunity in the kick return game, but you're not putting him into your starting roster, so it's probably irrelevant unless you're playing in a special teams league. Moving on to their defense, I just want to know your thoughts about this defense. What do you think about them?
This defense stinks.
They definitely have some good IDPs on this defense.
They
Dante
do.
Fowler from the edge position. They got Deion Jones, who's probably the top IDP on this team. He's their middle linebacker. Their first round pick was AJ Terrell, which is a cornerback. So I really don't like cornerbacks in IDP leagues because of their volume, or lack of volume, I should say. Keanu Neal is their strong safety. That's between Deion Jones and Keanu Neal. Those are probably my top 2 favorites for this team.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a few names that are interesting. Their defensive line is kind of terrible. I mean, Grady Jarrett's a solid defensive tackle, but that doesn't really matter for our purposes. Dante Fowler had a huge season for the Rams last year, and a lot of people thought he was a bust, and the Rams kind of signed him to a 1-year prove-it deal. And I mean, he proved that he's an effective edge rusher, so he does have defensive line eligibility. He had 11 and a half sacks last year, so he's probably going to have some weeks that are he's worth starting, and he's probably worth drafting as a starting defensive lineman, especially if you have to play two of them in your league. Deion Jones had 110 tackles last year from the middle linebacker position. He's a pretty safe bet to be fantasy relevant, and he kind of plays all over the field. So I like Deion Jones as well. Keanu Neal's probably my favorite. He's a late round guy in IDP leagues right now. He's only played 3 total games in the past 2 years, so he just can't catch a break. He tore his ACL last year, but in his rookie season, he had over 100 tackles. And I remember watching him, and I mean, this is a guy that can be one of the best safeties in the NFL. And I remember when they drafted him, Dan Quinn, their head coach, who came over from Seattle, said that this is my Cam Chancellor here for my Legion of Boom, which he wanted to build in Atlanta. But tell me how that worked out for him. But Keanu Neal was one of the central points of this defense, and that might be one of the reasons this defense has struggled so much because he really hasn't been on the field. But he's one of my favorite safeties to take because he's going so late in a lot of IDP drafts.
All right, so there you have it for the Atlanta Falcons. Just final thoughts and predictions. They finished last year 7-9 in their division, tied with the Tampa Bay Bucks, but they finished second in their division. We just did our Tampa Bay Bucks episode a couple episodes ago, and I had them finishing in second. So by default, Atlanta is going to be finishing in third because I think Carolina got finishing in fourth and the Saints in first. I think that they could flip that record around 9-7, maybe 8-8. But their defense stinks, so I don't know where I see them. I don't see them winning many games, but they could definitely finish with like a 500 record or a 9-7 record, and maybe push for a seventh spot, but it not. I don't know. I mean, I'm not predicting that they're gonna make the playoffs as a wild card because I already got the Lions making that spot. But if everything works out, they could make the playoffs with a 9-7 record.
Yeah, I mean potentially, but I mean I'm still old school, I guess. I think defense wins championships, and they barely have a rosterable one. So I I think that they'll finish with around the same record. When you look at this team and how it's built, it's really not much different from last year, and I would argue that they're worse because they lost their starting corners and replaced it with AJ Terrell. You know, rookie corners can kind of be all over the board, and I know a lot of people were surprised with how high they took AJ Terrell. People thought he was going to slip, and they took him in the first round. So I think they'll probably finish around 7-9, and I think that's just me giving a lot of credit to Matt Ryan, who I think is one of the most underrated QBs in the league. And very rarely do people talk about him as being elite. And I've heard this conversation a million times, but to me, Matt Ryan is an elite quarterback, and I think he's going to keep them in games single-handedly. So I would have them in third place in the division as well, but I would say it wouldn't surprise me if they finish below the Panthers.
And now going a little bit off, not really off topic because it's about Atlanta, but off just different than what we've done all the other episodes. Because I wanted to bring this up when we talked about AJ Terrell, but now they did go defense obviously with that first round pick that they had. They went AJ Terrell, but are you surprised that they didn't attack the running back position, take the first running back off the board there? What they didn't have Gurley at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was, especially, too. I that's why I didn't understand when they signed Todd Gurley because they could have gotten a cheaper, younger, more effective option in the draft, and especially where you see where these running backs went. I mean, so they would have missed out on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but they could have taken Jonathan Taylor, Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift. I mean, I thought DeAndre Swift was going to go there, especially with the Georgia connection there. And yeah, I mean, it didn't really make any sense for me. And I think that was one of the most disappointing pieces of the entire draft weekend. I think everybody thought the Falcons were going to take a running back. And we were all very excited because we talk about all these rookies and we have no idea what Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack are going to do with one another there. And Edwards, Hilaire, and Damian Williams on a smaller scale. Cam Akers with the Rams. But if a running back went to the Falcons and Todd Gurley wasn't there, I mean, they would clearly be the bell cow. So I think that was one of the biggest fantasy disappointments of the whole draft.
And just to back it up a little bit, they would have had an opportunity at Clyde Edwards-Helaire because they picked 16th, so it would have been he would have been picked there instead of where they
Well,
can't
that would
where
have
the
been
Chiefs took
crazy.
him. So yeah, but yeah, I mean they kind of dropped the ball there, but they did help out that defense. So it's not it remains to be seen. I mean, obviously the season has to play out and the careers have to play out, but I think everybody, if you were a betting man, you went to Vegas, you put money on them taking a running back, and you would have lost. But that's it for this episode. We'll see you guys next time.